Carefully following the instruction manual, I'm starting off by cutting the relevant pieces off the sprue. Making sure to use the flat of my hobby clippers against the edge of the model to minimise bumps. I'm using my scalpel to cut off bumps and scrape off mould lines. If any bumps are too large, you can use your hobby clippers to help. Sometimes, when there are mould lines on the textured areas, I like to melt them down with Tamiya extra thin. I'm attaching the pieces by pressing them together and applying Tamiya extra thin over the top via capillary action, meaning the glue will seep through the cracks, melt over the plastic inside the gap to join it together, and then solidify as it dries. I'm filing and scraping over the top to remove the gaps and brushing away with an old brush. I wanted to see how much I could access if I attached these parts together, so I used some glue tack to test it. The answer was I couldn't access the inside very well, so I left them off. These wheels had awkward notches from how they were positioned on the sprue. I tried carving down these notches and smoothing it down to make it less visible. Once that was done, I used some homemade sprue glue to make new lines. Sprue glue is just some cut up old pieces of sprue melted down with plastic glue to create a paste. It's useful for gap filling and editing surfaces mostly. Once we have cut and filed all the pieces down, we can then start pinning. To do this, score a mark on an inconspicuous area with a scalpel. Next, drill a small divot where you've marked it. It must not be too deep, otherwise you won't be able to get it out again. Once that's done, take a paperclip and cut it to length with some pliers. Glue the paperclip into where you've drilled with some superglue. Stick the piece into a cork to hold it in place, and do this for all pieces. With my airbrush, I'm priming all pieces with black surface primer. I'm first base coating the fleshy areas on the underside of the vehicle and on the pipes with Kislev flesh. I'm also doing the mouths on the sides. And the throne. I'm using pink horror over the top, trying to make a gradient effect. Try holding the model in different directions to hit different areas. For the blood letters, I'm base coating them in Khorne Red. For the metal parts, I'm base coating them in Iron Warriors. For the darker parts on the flesh, I'm using Screamer Pink. For the mouth parts in particular, I'm using Khorne Red. I'm using it on the top of the tongue, keeping the tip black. I'm base coating the knee pads and pistons with Iron Warriors. I'm also base coating the other pipes and platform in Kislev flesh. I'm putting some pink horror on the extra pipes and starting the gradients on the skin of the blood letters with Screamer Pink, and then making it slightly light in areas with pink horror. I'm using Screamer Pink on the pipes. Next, I'm using mephitson Red to start brightening up the blood letters. And I'm using Evil Sunz Scarlet on top. For the brightest areas like the face, I'm using Squig Orange. For the fleshy areas, I'm coating it all in Carroburg Crimson. I'm also using this on the blood letters. For the metal areas, I'm using a mix of Drakenhof Nightshade and Druchi Violet, coating the whole lot. Once that's done, I'm using asurmen blue and dabbing some bits here and there to create a patchy blue and purple look. Next, I'm dry brushing Grey Knight Steel all over the metal areas. For the blood letters, I'm first dry brushing Wild Rider Red all over. I'm then dry brushing Squig Orange on top. Using Silvergrey, I'm base coating the skulls and the teeth. For the metal trim, I'm using runelord brass. Hand painting this was taking a long time, so I'm using some liquid mask to cover all the areas and I will airbrush it. I can then remove the mask with the silicone tool. I'm also using runelord brass for the platform. Next, I'm masking off most of the bloodletters so I can paint the horns. I'm using Silvergrey as a base coat, making sure to allow room for a gradient to the skin. Next, I'm using Agrax Earthshade all over the bone areas. To make it fade at the edges, rinse your brush with water and use a clean brush to mop up. Water will make it more translucent, but you don't want it so wet that it pools. Afterwards, I'm using the airbrush to darken the tips with German black brown. I can take off the masking with a silicone tool. Where I may have had some overspray, I'm just dry brushing with Evil Sunz Scarlet. Next, I'm painting the Hellblades, making a gradient from brown, red, orange and yellow to finally some white on the edges. For a more in-depth tutorial, please check out the Hellblades video guide on my page. I'm using some runelord brass on the horn armour. I'm painting the gauntlets and chains with iron warriors. Once that's done, I'm placing a wash of Drakenhof Nightshade mixed with Druchi Violet. I'm then just touching up areas with Iron Warriors again. For highlights, I'm lightly dry brushing with Grey Knight Steel. Afterwards, I'm painting the trim in runelord brass. Going back to the Hellblades, I'm painting the top and bottom of the hilt with Silvergrey. The handle is done with German grey, washed with Nuln oil and dry brushed with light grey. For a more in-depth dive on how I paint Hellblades, please check out the Hellblade video guide available now on my channel. For the claws, I'm using Silvergrey. For the tongues, I'm base coating them in Xeris Purple and stippling in some Genestealer Purple on top. Once that's done, I'm dry brushing Thousand Suns Blue on the tip of the tongue, and then using some Druchi Violet wash on top. For the teeth, I'm using Silvergrey. For the straps on the legs, I'm base coating them in German Grey. I'm using Iron Warriors for the chain on the beard, and then using Snakebite leather for the wraps. For the tassel, I'm base coating in Warpstone Glow, and then highlighting with Moot Green. For the areas that have been base coated in Silvergrey, I'm going over it with some Agrax Earthshade. I'm then just lightly dry brushing Silvergrey back on top of the skulls, with some stronger highlights where needed. For the eyes, I'm using Demonic Yellow. I'm airbrushing some black onto the edges of the back, hands, feet and horns to make them look burnt. I'm dry brushing some Silvergrey back onto the bone areas on the Hellblades. And I'm also dry brushing a white line on the centre of the Hellblades. Next, I'm gluing down the leg armour with some Superglue. I'm carefully masking off all the teeth areas on the sides. Next, I'm base coating it all with Iron Warriors, and then covering it in a mix of Drakenhof Nightshade and Druchi Violet. Next, I'm dry brushing with Grey Knight Steel. For the teeth, I'm airbrushing German black brown onto the edges. Going back to the throne, I'm using some Silvergrey to brighten up areas of the bone, and then covering them in Agrax Earthshade. I'm then using some German black brown on the edges of the bones. I'm base coating the bottom with Iron Warriors, with a wash of Drakenhof Nightshade and Druchi Violet, and then dry brushing with Grey Knight Steel. Next, I'm painting all the trim with runelord brass. I've masked off all the pipes and fleshy areas and I'm airbrushing Iron Warriors all over the top of the main body of the vehicle, and then using Drakenhof Nightshade and Druchi Violet wash. Dry brushing with Grey Knight Steel. I'm rubbing some of the paint off on some contact points with isopropyl alcohol so I can stick them together a bit easier. I'm gluing them with Tamiya Extra Thin and then using some sprue glue to fill in the gaps. I'm doing the same on all pieces to stick them together. I'm also using a silicone tool to smooth out areas where I have to use sprue glue. I'm painting over areas that need touching up with Iron Warriors, and coating them in Drakenhof Nightshade and Druchi Violet. Afterwards, I'm using Druchi Violet and just dotting it around wherever I feel like it, and then doing the same with carroburg Crimson. For the base, I'm cutting up pieces of corkboard and dry fitting them around the vehicle to make sure everything will fit on the base nicely. I'm making some texture paste with gypsum plaster powder and water, and I'm carefully spreading it over the cork pieces to make them look more solid on the base. I'm then placing some smaller rocks around, securing them with superglue. I'm scraping down the sides of the base with a scalpel to make sure it's all nice and smooth. Next, I'm spraying the whole thing black with my airbrush, and then spraying white over the flatter areas. For the rocks, I'm using some Nuln oil, and then dry brushing some light grey, with some Carrick stone on top. Moving on to the lava, I'm airbrushing demonic yellow in the bits where I want it to appear the hottest. I'm then using some Trollslayer orange around the rocks, and using mephitson red next, and then Khorne Red around the edges. To add some more detail, I'm making fine lines everywhere using all the previous lava colours. Ideally, we want the lighter colours to be where I want it to appear hotter, and the darker colours to be where it's cooler, such as around the rocks. Once that's done, I'm rimming the base black to neaten things up. I'm using some Druchi Violet and carroburg Crimson on the platform, and then I'm gluing that down as well as the blood letters with some superglue. The last steps are just covering with a gloss varnish and then a matte varnish. And that is the model complete.